back to what the question you're trying to avoid. Don't try to leave now, Aaron. I see you. Hands up. Hands up.
Ah, God.
Well, it comes back to this, like when it comes to
wide versus narrow directivity. I think most people like wider directivity speakers, right? And I think narrow is probably going to be like a more specific case. And I actually reached out to Sean Olive last week about that. I said, "Hey, do you have any papers or any research that would answer that question for me?" Right. So he sent me a white paper, and I haven't had time to sit down and look at it because time is not on my side lately. But I do plan to look at it. But he did say anecdotally that he too prefers wider radiation speakers. So just for what it's worth.
So you pretend like you're not interested in the question, but you asked Sean Olive. He gave you a white paper, and so you're trying to find the answer to this too.
Oh yeah, like I want to know, because generally speaking, it seems like most people prefer wide radiation, but I want to know if there's been actually any studies that done on it, and with different, not necessarily playback methods, but just trying specific things, because there's always caveats. Like I like this, but. Right. So what are the buts?
So how about this? So generally speaking, what would be a wide radiation pattern? Like if I didn't know about speakers and I looked at speakers, like which one would you look at? Say that one probably has a wide pattern.
So that's a good question. That's something else I would like to find personally. And I say this in my videos when I talk about this stuff. I say personally, I say that like plus or minus 50 and above would be wider, and then narrower would be more narrow, right? So that's like the negative 6 dB point. So like as the sound is trailing off at about 6 dB and going lower in volume, where is that radiation pattern at, right? And then the other thing too is a lot of speakers just aren't constant directivity, right? So they don't maintain that same pattern throughout as they're firing off into the room. So at some frequencies, they may have narrow radiation pattern, and at other frequencies, they may have wide radiation pattern. Right. And then that influences what you hear in the room. So yeah, there's a lot of little things in here when we start talking about wide versus narrow radiation. Croson, let me see. What if your narrow dispersion covers your listening position if they're angled properly to cover this? Right. And that's fine. But so the thing is, it's not so much, and for what it's worth, nearly every speaker that I listen to or I review, I'm always talking about on axis. So the speaker will be aimed at you. I rarely, if ever, I rarely tow speakers out away from you. And usually when I do that, it's waveguided speakers or coaxial speakers where they're designed to be towed out at least like 10 to 15 degrees, give or take. Most of the speakers I use are aimed toward the listener. There's the time intensity trading where people will take waveguided speakers and they'll crossfire them. So the left speaker fires at the right listener and vice versa, for a multi-seat kind of home theater type setup. So there's that aspect, do you want a narrow radiation speaker for that? And then the other thing is a narrow radiation speaker is going to have less room interaction, right? So let's first of all assume that the speakers that we're talking about have good controlled directivity. So there's no aberrations in their off-axis response, and that whatever they're firing to you is going out off-axis in the same manner, because that's important to understand. When you have difference between what's going out into the room versus what's coming at you, as far as like the tonal balance, then things go up in the air quickly. So with the assumption that the tonal balance is the same roughly between on-axis and off-axis, then the less room interaction you have, and this is anecdotal, the more focus that you're probably going to have with the images and the soundstage. But the soundstage may not be as wide, as vast, possibly not quite as deep. And that kind of plays into the room interaction as well, right? Because you can imagine that if you've got a lot of reflections going off a wall and coming at you, there's a little bit of time smearing, a little bit of tamper smearing, a little bit. But if you don't have much, if you just have like a laser flashlight shining right at you and nothing is going off the walls and bouncing off, then all you're going to hear is that focused image. So that's why I say this isn't really something we can kind of roll it up and try to roll it up, I guess, and put it in a little, bow. But it's not really something that you can just say without a doubt, this is that thing, right? That's why you need on-axis data and you need off-axis data, vertical and horizontal, to understand the energy that's being spread out into the room. And then that gives you a better idea of how you need to aim the speaker or what kind of coverage pattern is going to work best, because you might have just you in the prime spot and you don't care about anybody else.
Yeah.
Or you've got multiple people sitting side by side, multiple people sitting behind you in a home theater type setup, and you may want a more wide distribution sound. So it's those kind of things that go into understanding the data and figuring out what works best for us.